Добрий ранок, шановна аудиторія. Ми обіцяли вам спеціального гостя, і ми імпровізуємо, бо наш спеціальний гість не з'явився, але ми іншого спеціального гостя і коментатора запросили на сцену. Мій колега – це Алекс Шпрінтсен, який вже 20 років працює продюсентом в Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, в канадській телекомпанії головній, працює над документальними фільмами в відділі новин і зосереджується не тільки на проблематиці Росії і України, але по різноманітній тематиці. Можливо, я йому задам декілька питань. Він народженець Харкова. Він зробив такий унікальний фільм про своє минуле, про минуле своїх товаришів із Харкова, відвідував їх опісля всіх бурхливих подій, опісля Майдану, і описував всі внутрішні, я би сказав, різноманітності поглядів людей на сході України в цьому документальному фільмі. Я перейду на англійську мову, але, можливо, Алекс, якщо захоче, може відповідати по будь-якій мові, яка йому вигідна, але я думаю, краще буде це робити англійською мовою, то всі, я би попросив всіх вас, котрі маєте апарати для перекладу і котрі потребуєте переклад, ласкаво їх включити.
Мне выгодно по-русски тоже.
Да, но мы не знаем, кажется, может быть, лучше будет все-таки по-английски. Мы будем работать по-английски. И у нас есть аккуратно 20-25 минут, и я задам несколько вопросов. Так, sorry about that, вибачте, I'm switching to English right now. Alex, you have been part of the Canadian and North American broadcasting universe for 20 years. You have colleagues in the United States and Canada who are covering events in Russia, the Russian-Ukrainian tensions, and our conference really is dealing with the mechanisms of propaganda, and a lot is said in Ukraine about and spoken about the massive apparatus that the Russian state engages in promoting disinformation, promoting propaganda about what is going on in Ukraine and so on. And I wanted just to get a sense from you how you and your news colleagues who cover the region understand the messages that are coming from Russia. Not so much you personally, because you come from this region and have a depth of understanding, but I would say more casual reporters who interact with the issues of the war in the East, of internal political changes in Ukraine, to how do they perceive what Russia is telling the world, how do they assess the Russian propaganda, and in your view, how effective is it, especially in North America?
Well, thanks, Adrian. Can you hear me? Okay, I guess it's working now. I think that it's a good question, and there's a kind of a multi-layer answer in the sense that there's been an evolution over the last year and a half since kind of everything started happening in Ukraine. I think that people in the West in general, and in North America in particular, in Canada certainly, were kind of slow off the mark, because there was a fairly apathetic, sort of benign attitude towards Putin, towards Russia up to that point, partly because nobody really cared, nobody was paying much attention. I mean, every once in a while things would pop up, the Olympics, for example, and obviously some of the stuff that has happened in Russia after the last time that Putin was elected president, the gay bashing and the adoption laws in Russia. But I think once the Ukrainian situation started, people started paying more attention, but there was still some skepticism about Ukraine's argument that Russia is the aggressor. Nobody bought into one of the things that immediately Russia suffered for was the Crimean invasion, because it was very difficult, no matter what the propaganda was, it was very difficult to explain it away. And I think people started paying attention at that point. But I think the main turning point in this entire, I guess, climate towards Russia was ironically enough, was the Malaysian plane going down. And ironically, because that's the one thing that in any direct way had very little to do with the conflict. Obviously it did, but it didn't involve Ukrainians and it didn't involve Russians. It involved mostly the Dutch. And I think that when North American and world media descended on that area, and when they witnessed more than anything the attitude of the, I guess, the rulers there, or the DNR, whatever you want to call them, and how they were dealing with the situation, it became very obvious that to put it mildly, these were not nice people. But more important to do with propaganda, it was obvious that they were lying. It was, people could see what happened. People got the idea that where the missiles likely came from. People got the idea that these people weren't allowing international monitors to actually check what was going on, what happened. Obviously, we know that they were doing certain things with remains, which were seen in a very negative way in the rest of the world. And I think at that point, people started questioning pretty well everything that was coming out of Moscow. And just one interesting example I'll give you in the way that the coverage changed is that early on CBC, for example, there was a tendency to report events. Let's say something happened in Donetsk or around Donetsk, and you had to report that Russia says X and Ukraine says Y. And CBC would do that, regardless of the value of the two statements or the likely truth of the two statements. There would be this kind of he said, she said balance and so on. What's happened, I would say, over the last maybe 6-8 months is that we don't do that. There's a certain understanding. For example, if you remember, there was a missile that was the rocket that went to Mariupol. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime earlier this year. And the Russians gave their own version, whatever it was. It wasn't covered that way. In other words, there was an understanding that it had to have come over from the Russian side or from the Russian-controlled side. And I think that's kind of what people are doing now. But it's certainly not enough, because there's still a tendency, and this has always been my concern, that we in North America and in the West have one, generally speaking, very good instinct in the way that we do journalism. And that's try to balance the two sides, try to show both sides of whatever the issue is. The problem that we run up against when it has to do with propaganda is that there aren't two sides. Sometimes there's only one side, or there's only one side that actually provides a competitive argument, and the other side provides propaganda. And unfortunately, or fortunately in the sense that that's kind of our way of operating, unfortunately is that we don't have a way of dealing with propaganda effectively. And so what happens still is that there's a particular issue, Russia sends out a missive, whatever that is, about something going on, and the initial instinct by a Western-trained journalist is to treat it as a possibility and to provide both sides. And of course, that creates a certain equivalency, which is an issue.
We hear a lot about the vast array of resources that the Russian state deploys for direct communication through things like Russia Today, through inserts into publications through the use of lobbyists and intermediaries to press its message. To what extent do you think this propaganda campaign that's directed at, say, the North American audience has any kind of resonance? How do you assess the performance of this asset for which Russia is devoting something like $400 or $500 million a year?
I think that the effectiveness, if I can call it that, of, for example, Russia Today is much more relevant to Europe than it is to North America. I don't think that we do get Russia Today in Canada, but I don't think that it has any real clout at all. I think that in the context of what I described, generally speaking, Russia Today has kind of become exhibit A of what I mentioned in terms of propaganda, because most Westerners, the ones who care about this issue and the ones who pay attention, tend to be shown examples from Russia Today because they're in English. And so the association is very often that Russia Today, ergo propaganda channel of the Kremlin. So I don't think that Russia Today tends to be particularly effective as a communication device in North America. And frankly, I'm not even sure that now it's all that useful anywhere else. I mean, it's obviously they do from time to time. One of the things that they do is they will provide real news every once in a while on issues that have nothing to do with this, and they use that as a kind of currency to push whatever else that they do. But I don't think that in North America it has any real effect.
We know that, at least I know, or I believe, that in the aftermath of the Maidan and the transformations, there was a great hope that Ukraine was changing its ways, that the country was moving towards Europe and reforming and so on. And although a lot of Western coverage of Ukraine is sort of the give and take of the crisis of war and the economic crisis, how would you say that your colleagues in the back rooms of the editorial boards, when they talk about Ukraine, what do they today think? What are the kind of the main tropes, the main sort of images that are part of the underlying assumption of people who have a casual or non-specialized knowledge of what's going on in the country? To what extent do they feel that the reform momentum is going on? Do they feel that the oligarchs are in charge? I mean, how do they see the country, and how has that evolved over the last, say, year and a half?
I think that the unfortunate reality is that Ukraine tends to be, despite the fact that Canada has a huge Ukrainian diaspora, the biggest in the world per capita, and probably in absolute numbers too outside Ukraine, in Russia. Unfortunately, it doesn't register. The way that Ukraine registers, even over the last year and a half, is from the point of view of the violence, really, and of the crisis to do with first Crimea, but more, I mean, obviously Maidan, when things were going on here in the fall of 2013, and then naturally the various flashpoints of what's been going on in Donbass and in that area. The questions that deal with actual changes, the economy, trying to get rid of corruption and things of that sort, they tend to be kind of sidelined and not covered very much. I mean, you know, we, for example, CBC, we've sent reporters, I mean, aside from the documentary that Adrian mentioned that I had done, we have a couple of news reporters who have gone to Ukraine, but every time they've done that, it's been really to do with various crises, or every once in a while, maybe to report on something that Canadians are doing. I mean, for example, they send some doctors to help out with the wounded. But again, it has to do with the war. I can't honestly, I mean, there are print media that have written about attempts to root out corruption and some of the changes. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any reports, for example, on CBC that have dealt with that issue. So most Canadians, I would guess, unless they're engaged in the way that, let's say, we are, or they get their information online and so on, most Canadians probably have this kind of view of Ukraine as a, unfortunate victim of Russia's aggression, but probably still kind of a backwards place with a lot of corruption and stuff is going on. The West is giving it a lot of money, and that's basically all we know.
A final question leading into the rest of the day's discussion. We will be discussing Russian propaganda mechanisms, how the Russian news media are used to create a sense of reality, how those mechanisms of control and influence are exercised internally in Russia and externally. But maybe you could say something from your more than casual acquaintance with Ukrainian media. How do you assess the broad performance of the news media of the Ukrainian state? To what extent do you feel that they are succumbing to what we call the temptation of propaganda? To what extent are they becoming more professional, more diverse, and more objective, especially in the sort of the sort of in the post-Maidan environment, but also in the environment of conflict and war?
Okay, first, full disclosure, the reason that I'm here now is that I'm doing next week a week-long workshop with a colleague from the CBC, essentially teaching investigative journalism to journalists from Hromadske television. And we did this last year, so I'm familiar. I've been watching certainly the reports that Hromadske has done, and I read print stuff, and I watch. What I would say is that there's no, and I watch Russian media all the time, and there's no question that Ukraine and Ukrainian media have leaped, certainly from the point of view of journalism. What I mean by that, when you take a look at the various reports, they're not propaganda, generally speaking. Yes, from time to time, there's a kind of a rah-rah quality that, we're under siege, so we need to protect ourselves. But much of the stuff I've seen is rooted in facts, and its point is journalism, not a particular point of view. The issue for me, and one of the reasons we're here, is how to put all that, how to put that into a package that is interesting to watch and read. And I think there are still lots of challenges. I think that sometimes simply putting 10 minutes of facts on the air, let's say if it's on TV, is not enough. And I think that if you want a broad audience, if you want people to watch and read and absorb what you're saying about, let's say, Yanukovych's life of luxury, you do need to do it in a way that people are going to want to consume it. And I think that's the big challenge now. But certainly from the point of journalism, I'm actually very impressed.
One last final question, and that is about media ownership, about the role of public television as an alternative to business ownership, oligarchic ownership, and so on. We know that in North America there are some television stations that are very political, that are very close to the political ideas of their rich owners, that while they have a news section, there are a lot of talk shows and so on where the commentary is very politicized, very heated, whether on the right or on the left. Ukraine has a sort of maybe a similar, though not as much political, a left-right division on its media spectrum, but it does have a lot of, I would say, ownership influence issues. How, is Ukraine completely off the planet from the way business is done in the West in terms of ownership, intrusion in media? How do you judge it? How do you see it and contrast it with what you see both in Canada and in the United States, and also that specific niche of public broadcasting, which Ukraine is kind of grappling with, under-resourced, but in kind of in vitro, in formation, so to speak?
Well, Ukraine is not completely off the planet, but there's no doubt that these kinds of financing issues are fairly specific to places like Ukraine and Russia and so on, and former Soviet states, in the sense that even in as much as in the United States or in Canada or in Europe, there are either newspapers or networks which provide a particular point of view. There tends to be such a plethora of sources that it doesn't seem to be such a big deal. I mean, the obvious example used in the United States is Fox TV, but there's MSNBC to counteract it, but there are also all kinds of other options. I think that in order, you mentioned public broadcasting, and I've worked for Canada's public broadcaster for more than 20 years, and I'm a huge believer in public broadcasting, and especially for a place like Ukraine, which doesn't quite yet have a mature media landscape. Because if you don't have that, then you very easily will fall into the issue of propaganda, meaning that it'll be whatever it is that whoever owns it will provide information that they consider information, but in many ways it's propaganda. It's whatever it is that they're trying to convey. It's spun in a certain way. And I think what public broadcasting provides, if it's done properly, and I think Ukraine desperately needs that, is that it obviously is not, in theory, loyal to any particular commercial brand. It tends to be, generally speaking, public broadcasters around the world, the ones that work well, they tend to be challengers to power. Whoever is in power, I mean, governments hate public broadcasters, whether it's the BBC, whether it's in France, whether it's in Canada, and it doesn't matter what the government is. There's kind of this tendency to think that, public broadcasters tend to be on the left. I think that's an exaggeration. I think what public broadcasters do is they challenge those in power, whatever stripe they happen to be. And I think that's what is desperately needed, because that's how you keep those who have power, whether they're in government or in business or anywhere else, accountable. And the only way you can do it is if you are somewhat independent of influence. And in that sense, because, as you say, Ukraine has, let's say, 3-4 major media streams that are owned by individuals who have a point of view and who want to pursue that commercially or otherwise or politically, I can't think of places which are more in need of a proper public broadcaster in order to differentiate between propaganda and real information than Ukraine.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for being willing at the last minute to step in for a guest that could not be here for reasons of scheduling. And we appreciate a kind of a little bit of a preamble to set the tone for the rest of the mornings and afternoons discussion. I will ask the next panel, the first panel for this morning, to come up to the stage, and thank you once again for sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.